Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Building with Ben, or should I say Refactoring with Ben. After all, in the last episode, we built our Halloween-themed app Peek-a-Vue, but we left the code in kind of a, well, spaghetti code-like place, where it wasn't the easiest to follow what was going on, and if in the future a developer wanted to enhance it or fix bugs, not exactly the greatest place we left it in. So, in this episode, what we're going to do is go ahead and refactor our code so that it's not only more organized, but easier to maintain and enhance as we go on in the future. Ready to jump right in? Let's do this. To get started, I'm here in my terminal inside of the Peek-a-Vue application. I've gone ahead and checked out a branch that has this starting point, so it's called Refactor V1 start. So in case anyone's looking to follow along, that's where we are on the branch, but I'm gonna be going ahead and working off of main. So just so you know, I'll go ahead and add that to milestones in the README for the repository for those who wanna sort of start over and just sort of follow along. Okay, so to start, let's start up our web server. So yarn serve. And then we should be good over here. All right, so we see our game, everything's working, which is good. And so let's jump into VS Code and let's talk refactoring, because that's the reason why we're here. Is because yes, the game works, but you know, as for those who followed along, the code's not exactly optimized for maintenance, and frankly, like there are things we can do to make it easier as we want to add more features and just fix bugs going forward. So as we look through our card.vue component, you'll see that like overall, it's the code is very declarative. As from like we have our props here, you know, that have whether a default or required, which is nice. And then we know that setup here is fairly minimum, right? We know that it's controlling flip styles. We know that it's emitting an event, and so overall, like this component is fairly concise, and we have our various styles here. So there's not too much here that we might want to refactor. We might want to improve some of the CSS name, but nothing major here. On the other hand, what I do want to spend the bulk of my time for this session focusing on is the app.vue. Because here we can see that while we have our HTML up top, and then we have our script on the bottom, we can see that this is actually, there's quite a lot going on here inside of the script block. And it takes a while for us to get down to the style block. And so while a lot of the components ship by default with template, script, and then style, in my opinion, one of the things when it comes to developer experience, like if you think about it, the JavaScript is rarely actually impacting the style block, right? Like you're not writing functions that then you need to go into CSS and update the styles. It's actually quite rare. And on the other hand, you have HTML and CSS; those interact with each other a lot, and HTML and CSS and JavaScript interact together a lot as well. So from a developer experience perspective, I much rather typically if you work with like a component that I've basically composed from scratch, I prefer having the script block up top, and then the template block in the middle, and the style at the very bottom. And that way you basically get like a nice sort of shared concerns when scrolling between, and it's not as painful to be like, okay, I got to update the class here and then jump all the way down to the CSS. Like it just flows a little bit better for the user. And also considering the fact that a lot of times when we're modifying component functionality, JavaScript is one of the first things we want to do anyhow. So given that, this is sort of the preferred order of blocks when using components in my mind. So knowing that, let's go ahead and follow sort of my preferred pattern of making small commits. For the purposes of really just having that sort of storytelling, especially when people are revealing pull requests, you can actually see what happens during a commit rather than a bunch of things happening at once. And then we can just tell a bit more of the story, and it's just easier to follow. So this is a refactor to reorder. So let's see, optimize DX scrolling for app.vue blocks. That's why we did this, right? Okay. Switching back into VS Code, let's go ahead and, well, as we take a look at the setup block here, this is like by far as like ensuring we get the maximum value out of our refactoring. It really does exist in here because we just have so much stuff going on here that it's kind of crazy. Yeah, so we just have so much going on in here that we really need to break this out so that it's easier to maintain. And so when we're looking at this, I think the first thing we want to do is actually like we have this boilerplate here for creating the deck. And while that is useful functionality, it's not something really that concerns app.vue. In fact, like app.vue really just they just want a deck. And so in that regard, what we're going to do is inside of our source folder, we're going to create a folder called features. And so, you know, some of you might be thinking like already like, oh, isn't like, I heard some people are using like this word composables. And so personally, like I'll give a separate talk on this later. Composables is just, it's just kind of a new sort of technical jargon that I don't think really adds value to a code base as far as like, basically like what it doesn't explain to people what it does besides the fact that it contains composition API functions, when in reality, like, the composition API functions are most of the time just JavaScript with a little bit of Vue magic sprinkled on top. And so similar to how we have utilities here for Confetti, I find that it's better to use folder names that are declarative and are sort of more welcoming to people like sort of various backgrounds, because that way someone who's not as familiar with Vue will like when they walk in and see a features, right, for a deck, they're gonna know, oh, like, yeah, I know what that is. I know what it's supposed to do. But when you say composables, there's almost this instant like, I don't know what this is. Like, is this some sort of magic? And frankly, like for the most part, it typically isn't. And in the cases that there is, we'll find ways to deal with that. But as a whole, I'm a bigger fan of features. And so inside of features, right, we have this deck functionality we want to use. And so a common convention right now being used is the like use prefix. But again, I really prefer to be declarative about what you're doing, because yes, you can be using a JavaScript file, but again, by that argument, we use every single JavaScript file. So we're not gonna prefix every JavaScript file, are we, with use? Because by that point, the prefix has basically been useless. And so we're trying to create an instance of the deck. And so in that regard, I think createDeck.js gives a much more explicit like statement of what's happening. And anyone who, again, as long as you know some JavaScript, there's no barrier of entry to being like, oh, it's a feature that creates a deck. Like, everyone's on board. And so as far as creating the deck goes, we know a couple of things. We know that one, right now, the deck is currently referred to as card list. And so we will want to go ahead and pull that out. And so we have card list here. And so let's just start by like figuring out what happens. So now that we've refactored it out, let's just see what happens, right? So when we save, we'll see that everything's broken, right? Because card list is not defined. This makes sense because we frankly haven't imported it. So here, again, we have the ref here, so we need to import ref from Vue. That's the first thing we got to do. And then the other thing now is we're gonna export an object. Well, there's a couple ways to do this, but so what we're gonna do, we're gonna choose to export basically either an object or a function. And in this case, since we want to actually create the deck, it actually probably makes more sense to export a function called createDeck that will take in an argument that we can figure out later if we needed. And then here is where, what is that function going to do? Well, in this case, we're going to do something for now as simple as returning the deck. So in this case, you know, since we're creating a deck, I am just going to call it deck, create deck. No, card list is, I like how declarative that is for now. So we're going to return the object card list. So basically, when we call this function, so here, let's go back into our app.vue. We're going to import from our features. So from features, features slash create deck, right? We're gonna export a function called create deck. So this here maps to our create function right here, because this is what we're exporting. So we're calling this is what we're pulling out. Okay. So now that we know that, what we're going to do here inside of setup is we're going to go ahead and basically like set up, like basically we're going to bring that into our component. And the way we do that is we decide what variable we're going to call it. In this case, we're going to say that we know that an object is going to, so hold on, let me do this. Deck data is going to be equal to, what do we say? Create deck and just call it. And so this function will call and we'll return this object in here. And the way I'll prove that is we're gonna go ahead and just, we're gonna log deck data when it shows up. And then actually I'm just gonna, and then hopefully this will work even though there's an error. And so just to show you that it's working, we're gonna go 1, 2, 3. Okay, so if we refresh, it really doesn't like the fact that car list doesn't exist. Okay, so hang on one sec. I'm gonna go ahead and cons card list and I'll explain that this will make sense a little bit later either. This will make sense a little bit later. Okay, so you'll see that when we log out, let me refresh this. When we log this, you'll see now that card list has actually been, is part of this object, right? And that comes directly from what we return here. So we define what we want to return from the function, and that's what we're getting. And so that's why using ES6 destructuring, we can basically say, instead of like later having to call deck data.cardList, for example, we're pulling that out immediately so that it's available to the rest of basically the application. So knowing that now, we can go ahead and clean that up. Okay, so this is nice. We have our card list. It looks like we're having some issues. So let's go ahead and hard refresh. Let's see, Okay. Oh, right. 1, 2, 3. That's what I broke it. Okay, so now here, if we click, we should be able to play. So let's try this real quick. Give me a bat. Give me a bat. Okay, here we go. So if we click, okay, there you go. Now those match. Okay, so overall, like not anything too impressive just yet. So let's just keep going though before we commit. And so the deck also has another thing where we want to actually populate it, right? So this thing right here is a whole piece. This whole thing. So we can actually take this out. We don't need this to be in here. And so as we can imagine, nothing shows up. And that's fine because that's what we expect. And so if we take a look at what's going on here, we're going ahead, and so this is like basically the data that's being fed in. And we're going through and we're pushing, so this is where we're actually initializing the deck by pushing the data into here. And then we're mapping the position. And so overall, this is totally fine because this is being executed. But again, it's great to be declarative about what's happening because again, the fact that I had to explain this and rethink about this says a lot. So what we can do here is we can create a function, right, in this case. And so I'll call this init deck, right? So our just basically initialize deck is what we're trying to do. And so initialize deck, again, we'll shorten to init because this is fairly ubiquitous in the community. So here we have init deck. And so inside of init deck, we're going to go ahead and so card items dot for each, right? It'll pull this and then it'll go ahead and run through everything. And so in this case, actually, let's go ahead and call it basically deck data. That's what it's going to take. And deck data will then go ahead and run through each piece. And for every item, push that. Okay. And so what we're going to do here is when create deck is called, we're going to go ahead and run init deck basically because we want to initialize the entire deck. And so, yep, we have that. And then what we want to do then is, see, card item is assigned a value and never used. Where is card items? Yes, sorry. That's what. So we init deck. We're currently going to be passing in card items as the starting point. So if we do a hard refresh, there we go. Now we are in a better place, but we need to also then map the position to the card because right now we haven't done this, right? So we'll say again, the console. What we're doing is update card position. That's the whole point of this function. And so inside of this, we'll go ahead and call card list and run through and map everything. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and then once we init the deck, we will go ahead and update card position. That's what we'll do. So if we refresh, all right, everything is working again. So this is good. So we have these pieces already exported. And so I think let's go ahead and commit this first because everything's working. So we have a basic deck functionality. Okay. So this is a refactor, abstract, out, deck. See, basic deck functionality. Okay. So the next thing I want to do though is that it doesn't totally make sense for the card items to be just sort of kept in here at the moment. So it makes more sense for it to be coming from a third-party data source. So you can imagine this is an API or some other way for users to control it. Again, we don't want it to couple it directly with the code. So we're going to go ahead and create a data folder here. And inside of data, I'm going to call this basically Halloween deck. Not .js. We're going to do .json. So we're going to do. And so the Halloween deck is just going to be this array. So we're going to scooch that out. Things are going to break. So for this JSON, I just need an array. We're not going to do the object syntax. So now that we have this here, we're going to go in, and before everything just simply breaks, since we know it's going to be, we import Halloween deck from data. Oh, go to data / Halloween deck. And so now that Halloween deck is here, we can actually then pass it. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and for now, Halloween deck will be initialized here. But we can imagine that in the future, like a create deck would actually be what's being called. So maybe that is even, to be honest, an even better refactor at the moment. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and so inside of create deck, we're going to take deck data. And then so we'll save it like that. And so great, this is good. This will take in deck data. Okay, everything's broken. Wonderful. This is a good thing. Why? Because inside of our app.vue, we're going to go ahead and import our data. So again, import Halloween deck from Halloween deck.json, which we have here, although the relative path has now changed. So Halloween deck has been defined, and what we need to do now is when we create deck, we're going to pass in Halloween deck. That's what we're going to do. And so now this is much cleaner now. So in the event in the future we do our holiday deck, it would be as simple as swapping out this piece. And theoretically, I mean, gosh, the ideas are endless as far as switching out decks, but this is a great starting point for us. So let's go ahead and make sure we commit that. So create data layer for deck data. All right. Not clear. So back in VS Code, as we take a look at sort of what other high impact refactoring we can do for this session, it looks like we have a lot of things sort of managing the game state right now. And so when this comes to play, like, you know, as far as like starting a game, restarting the game, tracking these things, like this is not something app.vue really needs to know about. This is just functionality we can define somewhere else, and app.vue can certainly call it, but otherwise, like, there's really no point in keeping that here. So following the convention we did with create deck, what we're doing is we want the app.vue to be able to create a new game instance. So in that case, create game is very declarative and not basically like fairly straightforward to understand. And so inside of a game, we need to keep track of whether it's a new player. Definitely need that. We're going to want to start the game. And we want to be able to restart the game. So that's good. And so let's start right there for now. And so in the past, you know, what we did is we would actually do, so earlier, right, with, let me say this with formats, we do our export default function down here, right, where we're saying create game, and then we would do kind of what it is that we did inside of create deck. But you see that the one thing about create deck though is that, like, one, I'm calling the function directly and passing it in. But one of the trickiest part about this right now is that right now all the functions inside of card, create deck, for example, all track a ref that's inside. But we need to actually pass other data into our create game instance in order to define this. So creating it outside of here is just going to make it a bit tricky. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and import all of this directly in here. So let me go ahead and import ref from Vue. And it looks like we have a Lodash function in here. So let's go ahead and do that too. So import Lodash from underscore from Lodash. So that should take care of the imports issue. And so now this function will return new player, it will return start game, and it will return restart game. That's what it'll do. And so again, the tricky part here is that, again, card list is not defined anywhere here. So if we go ahead and save over here, for example, we're going to get a bunch of errors. Well, one, define never used. So let's clean this up a little bit. Don't need Lodash anymore, so that's good. It's saying these are not defined. So let's go ahead and define it real quick. And so instead of create game, we have create game from feature / create game. And then, so we have our create deck here. So what we can do is we can go ahead similarly is create game here. And we're gonna go ahead and bring in new player. We're gonna bring in start game, and we're gonna do restart game. Okay, so again, we're now exporting things just like we did with create deck, but the only difference is, as we can see, it's erroring at us because right now inside of create game, what we're seeing here is that cardlist.value is being referenced, but it's nowhere being called. And so what we want to do then actually is go ahead and pass, like when we start a new game, we can track certain rules and stuff, but like the deck itself, it should be fairly basically like it should be separate from the game itself. And so what we're passing in here, we're passing in sort of the deck. And so let's go ahead and just to refer all this, we'll just update all this. And so now we have our functions referring to the instance of the deck being passed in, and it'll update the value accordingly. And so here now when we call it create game though, we need to actually pass in this deck, which is going to be our card list. So if I go ahead and save it like this now, we should see everything shows up. And so now we can click, everything's good. When we start, everything restarts, everything shuffles, and we're good. So okay, let's just check that real quick. So this, it should check, it's checked, great. And so as we scroll through this, we have a couple of things going on as far as like game logic here, but it looks like for the most part, we're actually getting really close. Like app.vue is becoming much more manageable, right? We have a game state and we have a deck view. And so I think the one last thing we want to do actually is go ahead and track let's go ahead and track the status of the game, right? Because this is something that's entirely separate. So what the status of the game is, whether the cards are matched, this is something that really is associated with the game piece itself, and not logic that the actual app needs to follow. So in here, let's go ahead and paste our functions below, and let's see what we got. Let's see, we have computed. So a couple of things. One is we need to make sure that computed is imported from Vue. So that's a thing. Okay, let's go ahead and delete that from over here because now compute is not even needed on this side of app. So one less thing to watch. And matches found is not defined. So matches found in this case is defined down here. Okay, and then matches found is here. So it looks like perhaps, okay, well, cardlist is wrong because this is going to be the deck that we have access to from the. And so Peek-a-Vue, app.vue matches I found, that's fine. And so we can see here that matches found and status, I've updated it so it actually takes a proper deck and returns what was actually matched. And then we have the status. So let's go ahead and actually export this. So matches found. And then we also have the status. Okay. So I am actually just gonna mn rsta rst, and now we still have our matches found. Great, everything's in alphabetical order now. Okay, so here we need to now pull out a couple more things. We need to pull out matches found, and we need to pull out the status. So if we save now, everything, this refresh, everything should be good now. So we save this, and so I click here, hey, look at that, everything's matched. And so what we've done now is in this refactor, we've gone ahead and created basically a create game feature that contains the basics of getting started, right? Restarting the game. We're allowed to track the status of the game. And we clearly have been able to matches found, basically so returning that and maintaining the overall status of the game. And so with that, we have, I think, a good refactor here. Let's go ahead and commit that. So refactor, create game feature, abstract game feature. There you go. Let's just do that. Okay. And with that, we're done for this session. We've gone ahead and refactored quite a bit of our app, but as some of you may have noticed, there's still a bit of ways to go. But refactoring is one of those things that we can always improve on and iterate on as time goes on. With that said, if you want to follow along or check out what we've done inside of the codebase today, be sure to check out the link, which I'll include in the show description below, which will contain the code repo for today's episode. And with that, Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Ben Kozen, signing off.